Today, we take a very historic action that was 45 years in the making. In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education.
Now, before you freak out, we need to go through some very important background about the Department of Education, and I think that will ease a lot of people's minds. Now, the department itself is actually relatively new, but back in 1867, President Andrew Johnson actually signed the Department of Education into law. But it only lasted a year because they feared that there was too much federal control over local schools. It went from being a department to an office, and it had 4 staff members and a budget of $15,000. The office was actually housed in the Department of Interior, but then it kind of went back and forth with HHS for a while. Really, all they did was record keeping to see how students were doing every year. And in 1979, President Jimmy Carter signed a law that put the Department of Education back as a department. The whole goal of doing this was to, of course, improve education for everybody. Now remember, we started with a $15,000 budget back in the 1800s. Of course, not considering inflation, but when this bill was signed, the Department of Education had a $12 billion budget, and today it's at $80 billion. Of course, the big question is, has education gotten better since the department was created? Initially, yes, but in more recent years, both reading and math levels have actually declined. But technically, since the department was started, levels have risen a little bit. How are we doing compared to other countries? We spend about 38% more per pupil than other countries, yet we're pretty low or about in the middle compared to others. With the amount we're spending, we should be at the top. President Trump made it very clear in his address when he was signing the executive order that there are certain functions that are going to remain. That includes Pell Grant funding, Title I funding, and resources for people with disabilities and special needs. This entire move is really to bring the department back to its roots, which is an office in a different department. Now, probably one of your biggest questions is, how are schools going to be funded? Well, fun fact, federal funds only account for about 10% of what schools bring in. Most of the funding comes from state and local governments. President Trump is saying he's cutting the red tape, so most of the funds can just go right to the states, right to the schools, and we don't have to deal with all of the bureaucracy. But I do want to mention that President Trump is keeping some red tape of his own. States and schools will only get federal funds if they terminate DEI and the promoting of gender ideology. Now, the second biggest question that people probably have is, can a president even do this? Can President Trump even just sign away the Department of Education? President Jimmy Carter in 1979 signed this law that created the Department of Education, so only a law can reverse that. So short answer is no. President Trump cannot sign an executive order to make the department go away. And President Trump knows this. He talked about it, how he's going to need some act of Congress in the future anyway. But Thomas Massie has had this bill introduced, H.R. 899, and it quite literally just says to terminate the Department of Education by 2026. So whether you are for or against that, please contact your representatives and let them know what you think of H.R. 899. As always, let me know your thoughts about this. Do you want to see the Department of Education closed down and turned back into an office or not? Let me know and make sure you're following me for more.